can have it for our reference in library. So good to see you, Emily.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Utah Valley University. I love your background there.
Yes, hi everyone. Hello.
Right in the marketing right there. We've got a lot of people with questions. We have, let's see, how many people did it look like we had? We had about 43. We have 43 people.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a good little crowd.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, first of all, how big of a fan I am of your filmmaking.
Okay.
You and I, we've talked, I don't know, I think I've hung out with you a bit, but I think I've actually been in your house more than I've been hung out with you, because I know I've slept in your house a bit.
You have?
Yeah, I know. Like there was like a couple nights when you let me crash there when you weren't even there.
I know.
Years ago, right? Years ago.
I know. Before I had kids, I was very open with letting my house out to
film. Sure, I filmed there a couple of times and you weren't there. And you and I have hung out only kind of in passing. But I want you to know this. Next time you see Dave Boyle, right, brag to Dave Boyle that Rachel, my wife, loves your movies. Loves your movies and considers you just a great filmmaker and will watch you make. That's going to piss him off because she's very critical of Dave's movies.
Okay. Does she like my movies better than Dave's movies?
Absolutely.
Okay, I will tell him that.
He'll love it. He'll love it. That's just one of those little great ways to needle Dave, and we're always looking for ways to do that.
Well, first of all, my movies are in color, and most of his movies are in black and white, so I get it.
That might be part of it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about. I told you, this is a quote unquote semi-autobiographical story, but I know there's a lot of sort of truth in it, and I want to ask you about that. But before I do, the main question I want to ask is, where did you get Dior? Because I just think she's one of the best things in the movie.
Oh yeah, so the little girl that played Dior, that was her first movie. She's never acted in a movie before, and we were looking for a little girl in Hong Kong that could speak English, that could speak Mandarin, and that could speak, we were looking for someone who could speak Mandarin and English, and someone who could act. And we didn't really have like a proper like casting director we were working with, so it was just a lot of like, hey, do you know anyone? So she came from a recommendation of a friend, and I think she knew her mom, and they did like school plays together, and she came in and did the audition, and she was by far like the best little girl we saw. But then here's the kicker: the actor we casted playing the dad character, he's like a veteran Hong Kong actor, and we could talk about him. There's so many stories to tell about him. But in the scripts it's written that he speaks Mandarin, but once we started doing like rehearsals, we realized that his Mandarin was really bad, and it like hurt his performance. So he's like, oh, can I just say these lines in Cantonese? And I'm like, well, I guess, but then why? But then your children, we casted your children and they all speak Mandarin. So we made the little girl learn Cantonese. So she had to sort of phonetically learn all of her lines because Cantonese was not her native language. Right. And she really pulled it off. So, on top of this being her first movie, she delivered most of her lines in a language that she was not familiar with. So that's which is incredible.
Her face is so just like, you just want to just like hug her, it's like, it's okay, it's gonna be fine. Yeah, she's so great. Okay, now the bigger question. Okay, so we know this is, or I know this is based on your life. Also, I'm a huge fan of Already Tomorrow, and so it feels like those movies are from the same sort of cinematic universe. So tell us about like your story and what's true, what's fiction, and about creating a story that's about yourself and what that's like.
So like Duane mentioned, this is largely semi-biographical in that I did spend over a decade working for my family's toy business in Hong Kong and in China. So both of my films are set over there in Asia. But I would say the character of Sasha is sort of like a much more exaggerated version of myself at 24. I'm probably closer to the older sister character played by Lin Chen. So I sort of made a composite. I sort of split myself into two different characters in this movie. And there are just so many like personal elements in the film. For example, the toy factory is my family's actual toy factory. So we were able to shoot there. And that crazy house that the father character lives in is my dad's actual crazy house, which, looks like it's a knockoff of a Donald Trump,
Right.
like mansion in China,
Right.
with complete with the naked lady murals that Sasha sees. So all of that is like very much, like based in my real life. And I would say like the father character, we actually tamed. So Sasha is sort of like a more exaggerated version of myself, Ted, at 24, but the Teddy character is sort of like a tamer version of who my dad is in real life, because like in real life he was like married 5 times and has 8 kids. That's just too many characters for people to follow, so we had to combine a lot of characters and we kind of told the story. And also just like based on the actor too, like when he read the first draft, he was like, I don't know, like this character seems so over the top, and like he wanted a more nuanced character. And my dad is just a very sort of just like has a very big personality. And I always tell people he is basically like if Trump was like a toy tycoon in China, but without all that power and fame. That's sort of like what my dad in real life is like. But the Teddy character, we made him a little bit, more of a likable sort of like a little bit like a teddy bear in certain scenes. Yeah, so a lot of the characters, and just a general situation of her working in China was based on my experience. But this is by no means a biopic. Like I don't think any scene in this movie literally happened in real life. It's just sort of capturing kind of that moment in my life that kind of led to this point. And like I mentioned, I ended up working in the family factory for a really, really long time. I only just recently left, and I think it was right around the time I finished this movie. I think I needed to make this movie to move on, and moving to the next chapter of my career and my life. And in a way, this movie was almost like a resignation letter to this toy company that I've worked at for so long.
Fantastic. Let me ask you about, and people, I would, this was what I would like, is for you and I to go out to dinner and I ask you questions for about 2 hours. We don't get to do that. But I'm going to ask one more question and then I'll turn it over. I've got a long list of people who are asking questions here. And again, for those of you, because some people watched it with us on Zoom, but others just kind of watched it on their own. And so for those of you who want to ask a question, just put your name in the chat. I'm the only one who can see the chat, so I'll just read up who's there. Already tomorrow in Hong Kong. Okay, I teach a class right now. I'm teaching it, and it's about making your first micro budget feature. And that movie doesn't feel micro because of Hong Kong, really, because seems like such a huge production value city, but it really only has 2 speaking parts in like the whole movie, except for like maybe 2 other lines. So can you tell me a little bit, even though I know some people I think have watched it, because I encourage it in our advanced class, but can you talk a little bit about that production and what that was like, and how you went about shooting?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it, it's definitely low budget. I wouldn't call it micro budget. I feel micro budget is like what Dave pulled off in Surrogate Valentine, what Lynn just pulled off and I Will Make You Mine. I don't know if you're going to speak to her at some point, but that's a great case study on how to make a movie for really not a lot of money. Right. So Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong, I feel like, so the budget of that movie is $250,000, which is low, but not micro. I feel like micro is anything under 100. But I also feel like if I had made that movie here in Los Angeles, for example, I could have made it for under 100,000 because it's 2 people walking around.
Right.
But when you have international, it adds all kinds of costs because I did have to fly, the actors over there, the department heads. So that in itself, putting them up in hotels, that's just a given. But also it's SAG. It's the global one rule, right? So I think, Jamie and Brian, they loved the script, they wanted to do it, they were willing to work for scale. So scale in the US probably could have gotten away with paying them $125 a day. That's the lowest, ultra low budget scale. But once you shoot overseas, SAG makes you sign the most expensive contract where the day rate jumps up to like, I think at the time was like 800 or maybe 700 something. Now it's like $1,000 a day or something. So that just pushed everything up by a lot, so paying the cast at this highest level, even though they were paid scale, it was like the highest level scale. And also just crew in Hong Kong, they treated us like, so I'm Chinese, but even so, I am an American director coming to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So they treated us like a foreign production. So whereas they might give discounts or whatever to a local independent film, even though we were very indie, they still treated us like an overseas foreign shoot and would not give us their lowest rates, which I understand. They don't know me, like I'm sort of like a new person. So whereas if I shot this movie here, we probably could have gotten away with paying people like, that 150, 200, that low budget. But when you're in Hong Kong, everything sort of jumped up. Then it's more like 250, 300 a day, which is still not very high. But for an indie film, like there's just no way I would pay people $300 here. I just can't afford it on a small film. But I think the way we were able to make it work for 250 was because it was just two people walking around talking. The shoot only took 14 days. It was not a very long shoot. And this is the one really good thing about shooting in Hong Kong is that everything was free. You get a permit and then the city sort of just lets you shoot all over the place. It was just like, it became our playground. So we did not have to pay for a lot of the locations. Like the biggest location expenses, we did have to rent a ferry, like the two of them get together on a ferry boat. We didn't scale that shot, like we had to rent a ferry. So there are certain things that cost a lot of money, but they all even out because the government of Hong Kong was just so, go for it, shoot wherever you want. So we sort of was able to balance out the cost that way.
It's a lovely film, and you have such a great nuance with characters and with the, just the your character development is so great, and there's just all these layers that come out. I admire your writing, your directing is great. So fun to have you here. So I'm going to turn it over to some of these students, and they're going to ask questions. And again, those of you who are for some reason just popping on, if you have a question, put it in here. She is here to be asked, right? And you don't want to just listen to her and I talk because that'd probably be boring. So first one we're going to turn over to is Kira. Go for it, Kira. And unmute.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us and sharing all your knowledge. It's really awesome. So my question was, since you have shoot in like the US and foreign and with all the pros and cons, is there an area that you prefer to shoot and why? Like, would you rather stay US or foreign?
I mean, it just sort of, it kind of just happened by happenstance that both of my films were shot overseas in Asia. And that sort of became my niche, like, oh, she's a Asian American filmmaker that keeps making movies in Asia. Honestly, I would love to make a movie here in LA. I mean, we shot for 5 days and go back to China here in LA. I mean, that's like where my friends are, my usual collaborators. Like, I would love to stay here. But just because of my background, having spent so much time in Asia, it seems like all of my stories were inspired by my time, spent over there. And I really enjoyed making these two movies. And I think like it set me apart a little bit, just because, you know, people make coming of age stories all the time, but when you set it in a different country, you know, or like a walk and talk rom-com, they're kind of a dime a dozen, but then Hong Kong is what kind of makes it special. So I'm glad that I had the experience and the opportunity to sort of, you know, make my 2 movies there. But just on a practical level, I would love to stay home and make a movie with my friends, like in my backyard. And I've been a producer on a lot of films that were like shot here in LA, and that was great. And I would love to work with all those people again as a director, but just so far I have not found a story to make here yet. But yeah, that's like my goal. I would love to make a movie, you know, in LA sometime.
That's awesome. Is it okay I ask you one more question?
Go for it.
Sorry. Is there anything from the 2 projects that you ran into, like any issues that you would definitely recommend to avoid and kind of improve for your next projects?
Let me think about this. They were like challenging in different ways. So the first film, Alright Tomorrow in Hong Kong, was a very uncontrolled film, because it's just I basically just dropped my 2 actors in the middle of Hong Kong. Like all the people you saw on the streets, they were not extras, they were just real people. And we just like dropped them in every day. We have no idea what was going to happen. And we were outside every single day, shooting overnight. You know, weather was a big concern. Like, is it going to rain? Are we going to get rained out? Are people going to say hi to their mom on camera, which did happen, you know, like a few times. It's just like a very uncontrolled situation. So every day you don't know what to expect. So Go Back to China was different. It was a very controlled environment because we owned the factory. We, you know, it was all locations that we had total access to. So it was like totally different. But the challenge with that is shooting in mainland China is a very different kind of experience with Hong Kong. Like I mentioned, Hong Kong, we got the permit and they just said, go for it, have fun. We tried to get a permit to shoot in China, but it's just a bureaucracy. Like they kept changing their rules on us. You know, they would quote us one price and then the next day be like, oh, actually, it's going to cost you 6% of your budget. And it's like, we did not budget 6% of our budget to pay the permit. So then we decided to shoot in China without a permit, which I don't recommend, but it was sort of like last minute. I'm like, we do not have the money to pay them this last minute quote that they gave us. So even though we had very controlled locations, we were always sort of afraid that we might get found out and get shut down. So there's that fear. Whereas when we were just roaming around the streets of Hong Kong, in a way, it was very uncontrolled, but we always felt safe because we had the proper permit. So always get your permits. Here in Los Angeles, in America, it's like a very straightforward way. Like definitely do that, and definitely budget it in, because you definitely don't want to shoot in fear. But with China, it was just sort of something that we don't have a lot of experience with, and we decided to just wing it, and it worked out because we didn't get caught. But I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I enjoyed your films a lot. Thank you.
I've been caught in LA for filming off a permit, and you know, that's scary enough, of being caught in China.
In China, I know. We were scared every day. Yep.
Excellent. Be sure to say your name and what you are in school, so she has some context for you. Roan Oberg next. Roan.
Hi, Emily. My name's Roan Oberg, and I'm a junior. And I had a lot of fun watching the movie. I was hooked from start to end, and it felt like there was never a dull moment. And my question for you is if it was always like that, or if there was any extended scenes or any deleted scenes or longer takes that were taken to kind of help it flow so well.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, in the post process, you know, we always have to go through several rounds of test screening. So I think luckily for us, the movie always had kind of a pretty good pacing. We actually did a reshoot. There were just some, I mean, and I still don't love the scenes in the third act. We had to reshoot some stuff to cover up some plot holes in the third act. And when we added the new scenes in, I remember, our first test screening, everyone thought, it flowed kind of pretty well, but there was like a plot hole. So then we added more scenes to try to like smooth it over. And then after that test screening, then people thought the movie felt too long. So, it's always this push and pull of, you want to give people clarification. If people are confused by something, then you want to like add in the exposition or whatever, but then at the expense of pacing. So I think in the end, we came up with a pretty good compromise. I think the movie is like a couple minutes longer than it's actually longer than the first cut, because we added new scenes in to try to explain a few plot holes. But yeah, I think like we were lucky. Like it was never a case like our first cut was not like 2.5 hours and then we had to cut all this stuff out. Like our first cut was maybe like 105 minutes or something. It was already very close to sort of like the final product. I don't even think we cut any scenes out. We definitely like trimmed a lot of the scenes to make it move faster. On my first movie was the opposite problem. Our movie was too short. So we honestly had the opposite problem, because the script itself was short. And then I think the first cut came in and it was like barely 70, it was like 68 minutes. And it's like, this is not a feature film. And we had to add a montage, add more musical, so sometimes you have like the opposite problem, with pacing. So yeah, I think we got pretty lucky with this one. It wasn't like we had tons of scenes that we had to cut out and all that stuff, but we definitely made trims from multiple cuts to where we landed now.
Awesome, thank you. I never would have expected that you went and shot more. It all felt so natural the way it fit in. I love it had me hooked. Yeah, thank you.
Can you share which scenes there were pickups, scenes at the third act?
Yeah. So like, how does Sasha save her company in the end? Like her friends come over and they come up with this idea. And that was sort of tacked on because what we had in there originally didn't really work and didn't really make sense. So we just cut it out. We were like, oh, let's just cut it out. Like nobody would notice, but then people noticed. People were like, but how does she save it? So we're like, okay, well, let's just come up with a new scene. And then we, had limited budget for reshoot. So it was like, okay, what could we pull together in like half a day to get these actors back together? But this is an interesting story. One of the friends, because her friends came back, one of the friends was in Korea at the time and I had to buy her a ticket to have her come back early from her vacation in Korea. That costs, a pretty penny. But we're just sort of like, it's just weird if not all of her friends come back. Like it feels like if her friends come back, they should all come back. So I made her cut her. I asked her nicely and she said she was okay with coming home early. And she came and did that.
So going back after Kira's question, you were talking about the extras, the non-extras. So which made me wonder about two things. One, did they really photobomb the people on the stairs? Two, the guy with the blood that he kept saying, you see that guy?
Okay, so the blood guy, that was a crew member. Okay. So that was just like a visual gag because that was the first place we shot, and Brian Greenberg was like, oh my God, this place looks so creepy. Because it's like it's like Chunky Mansion. So we thought, well, let's add a visual gag where it's like, did you see that guy? And it was just like a crew member. We put some makeup on him. Yeah. That was like an improvised moment.
I wondered, oh my gosh, did that person really just walk through your shoe?
No, that was planned. The photo bomb, are you talking about the engagement photo?
Yeah.
So that was serendipitous. That was, we were shooting on that overhang and there was a couple, so that was not planned. There was a couple that was doing their engagement photo, but we did ask them, we're like, hey, we're shooting a movie. Do you mind if our actors just like photobomb you? And they were like, sure. So we totally didn't plan that part. We just showed up and they were doing their engagement photo and we thought it was so fun.
And I love the reference in Go Back to China, watching that movie was a lot of fun too. Okay, sorry, we're just having this conversation here. Wesley.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Emily. Thanks for hanging out with us. My name's Wes. I'm in the post-production track, and I'm like kind of a senior credit-wise. I'm getting there. But my question for you, I guess, would kind of be related to your early days of filmmaking. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about sort of what your film school experience was like and what it was like for you, you know, getting started on your first project and things like that?
So I went to film school a long time ago. I went to film school at NYU, and I took a sort of a different track. And and everyone's journey in this crazy industry will be different. There's really no one right way to go about it. And I certainly had a very like circuitous like way. So I went to film school. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I graduated from film school. So similar to what happened to Sasha, I was like very quickly summoned back to China. So I sort of took a 10-year break from film. So I always feel like I'm 10 years behind my peers or my film school peers, but I don't really regret it because I think because I worked in New York in sort of like a distribution field after graduation. I feel like if I hadn't left New York and gone back to China, what most likely would have happened to me was I probably would have become an executive. And that would have been, a lot of times I go into these meetings, I'm like, oh, I feel like that's a really cool job to just be the person who has all the power. I could see myself doing that. And I think that probably would have been what happened to me if I hadn't gone back to China. But because I did, I decided to, I thought, well, yes, there was the family pressure and everything, but I thought, well, my father's offering me this opportunity to make money. It's like, I'm going to go do this other career. And he was dangling like, do you, like, this is a very profitable, like, why are you slumming it in New York? Like, you could be the CEO of this company someday and go on this other track. So I sort of went this other track and I thought, well, maybe I just go make some money and I could make my own projects happen. And that's exactly what I did. So I went and I worked for 10 years. I saved up money and I was able to finance most of that first film. I also ended up making some just very lucky investments at the right time. But I didn't really need to ask anybody for money to get my first feature off the ground. And that's really the hardest part. And you could be 25 and find investors to invest your first, like, there's just so many different ways you could go about it. This is just kind of what happened to me. And because of RHMR in Hong Kong, we were able to make it for a certain amount of money. And that movie was very successful. We made money on that movie, which then we were able to then make my second film. I was able to roll the money from the first one into my second film. And I'm 40 now, so it's taken me 20 years to get to this point. And getting into South by Southwest with my second film was a game changer for me. And this is something that might have happened to someone in their 20s if they hadn't, gone away for 10 years. But, just getting a feature into that caliber of film festival, I was able to get new agents from it, and my new agents are just amazing. And they just landed me. I at the age of 40, I just landed my first studio film. And that was all because I was able to get an agent, and the agent only found me because I was at South by Southwest.
Congrats. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off,
and
but
that's something that you guys could do, like you can make a movie for like $50,000 these days, shoot it here in the US, don't go to Hong Kong. You can make it happen, get into Sundance, get into South by, and then like the agents will find you and they will push you on this track. I don't know how you could do it. This is how I've done it. That's how everyone I've known who've done it. They make a small film that gets into a film festival, they get noticed, and then they hopefully, the agents will really like usher your career and introduce you to everyone around town, and you go out and you pitch. I had to pitch on a lot of different films before I got my first one. You know, I mean, this could happen to someone in their 20s or 30s. It just happened for me later because I went this other route. But if I didn't, I feel like maybe I wouldn't have become a filmmaker. Maybe I would have just worked at a company and maybe became a creative exec. And maybe that's something you want to do. So, you know, there are just so many different tracks you could go after film school.
There's also the fact that, you know, by doing this, you have this life experience that's unique and different from other people.
Yeah, I was able to make movies about my experiences over there. So I think in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have changed a thing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Tyler McKinnon.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. This is so awesome. I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was just a lot of fun to watch. It was really entertaining. Thank you. I'm Tyler McKinnon. I'm a senior and I'm in the screenwriting track. And my question is, having written and then direct these films and then come out the other side, what have you learned about screenwriting that maybe you didn't know before, or what challenges did you go through in doing the writing that really helped you learn?
I mean, I feel like what I've learned after 2 films and just going through the whole film festivals reviews is that I need to be a better writer. Like everything, I feel like both of my films, you read the critics, it's always like, she's a great director, but she really needs to work with a writer the next time. But I feel like it's okay. Like I think you develop a thicker skin, you know, the more you do this and you read reviews, and it's like you learn from it. And I really think like I read every review and I think, and I don't get defensive. I feel like, okay, well, if the New York Times tells me she could improve on her dialogue, that is something I need to look at next time. You know, it's like, it's great that you have these professional critics sort of giving you critique. And instead of being dismissive and it's like, well, they just didn't understand what I was going for, like really listen. So I feel like I could always improve. And even just the scope of my films, you know, like the first one is 2-hander, all dialogue, walking and talking. And for the second one, it's like, can I tell a story that takes place over a course of a year versus just 2 characters? It's like you always sort of want to do bigger and challenge yourself more, because you know, after my first movie, everyone wanted me to make another walk and talk movie. And it's like, and that sort of became my comfort zone, but you don't want to just keep getting caught up doing the same things. So just constantly push yourself. And definitely with screenwriting, with directing, with everything, it's a craft. Like it's something that you have to constantly work at. It's just unfortunately when you're a director, you don't get that many opportunities to practice your craft. You know, but as a writer, that's something that you can do for free. So just constantly write. I mean, like whenever I have time, and I don't even love writing. That's like my least favorite part of filmmaking, but I still, you know, I got to push myself and I got to practice. Like sometimes I'm like, I'd rather watch, you know, an episode of whatever than to write. But sometimes I got to just push myself, like go write those 10 pages or whatever. You're only going to get better if you keep doing it. And you know, I'm still learning the craft of screenwriting after all this time.
Thank you.
That's a good thing. When someone asks, what have you learned? So I've learned that I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Okay. Felix Guzman.
So yes, thank you for this opportunity. Emily, I really loved your movie. We really enjoyed it. Me and my wife actually watched it together. So it was a great experience. Most of the questions that I had were actually answered during this whole time. But I do have a question that is also in my mind, and that is, I feel like I'm also starting late, like you were saying. I have a successful career and everything, and now that I'm 32 years old, I'm starting this whole thing. Didn't you ever feel like, you know, like you said, you felt like your friends were already in front of you? That when you felt like that, what made you push through? What made you like keep going doing it?
I mean, this industry is so hard, and you can't really compare yourself to other people because you have to be on your own journey, right? Like for a long time, I feel like that was my insecurity. Like, oh, I'm already in my 30s and I haven't even made my first feature. I made already to Hong Kong, I think when I was 34 or 35. And when I was going out to meet with agents, maybe because I look young, they all assumed I was 25, 26. And when they heard that I was in my 30s, we're like, oh, you're like much older than we thought. Like, I felt bad about it. Like, oh my God, they were expecting to sign a young, girl right out of film school. But you can't think like that because everyone has a different journey, and you can't really compare yourself with your friends because otherwise you just have to do the best work you can. And especially like so many of my friends are so talented, and now like sometimes we'll go out and pitch on the same movie. Like these things happen, and sometimes they'll get the gig and I'm very happy for them, but then there'll be times when I'm like, oh, why didn't I get it? But then like you can't get lost in those thoughts because that's not really going to help you in any way. And I always get really inspired when I hear stories. Like I was just talking to someone I think yesterday who knew Lynn Shelton. So she is a great filmmaker who unfortunately passed away last year. She started out indie film, made like Hump Day, Your Sister's Sister, and then she went on to become a very successful like TV director. Directed on Glow, like Little Fires Everywhere. She didn't make her first feature until she was 39. So that was always very inspiring to me because she is someone who's like, her career is one that I just really admire and wish I could have someday. And to just know, and don't think like, oh, if I didn't make my film at 39, it's like, no, you can make your first film at 45 or 55. It's okay. There's really no like set rule. I think whenever you're ready and you have a story that you want to tell and all the stars align, there's really nothing wrong with that. Like, I know like it seems like Hollywood favors, the hot young kids right out of film school, directed one indie, let's give you Jurassic World or whatever. But even now, with this sort of inclusive, they're like inclusive hiring. They're like, hire more women, hire more people of color, hire older people is also on their agenda, that you can't just discriminate because he or she is not some hotshot 25-year-old. So I wouldn't let that get in your way in any way, and don't get into your
old people, hire more old people.
Yes, we have stories to tell too. So yeah, I felt very insecure about that for a long time, but then I've learned to let it go. I've learned to embrace it. It's like I have more life experience than a 22-year-old, so yeah, so keep going, don't give up.
Thank you. I definitely will. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Ethan Knowlton. Ethan, are you with us still?
Yep. Hi, I'm not Ethan. This is Ethan.
But hi.
I'm Shane. I'm not actually a film student. Ethan is,
Shane? Hey, Shane, I hate to interrupt you, but you're not on my list yet. If you want to ask a question, put it down. I don't want you to.
No, he's with me, Duane.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can't see your photo.
Oh yeah, I just put my name because it's my box,
I'm sorry. I wasn't in.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. I should have clarified. Yeah, you just gave me permission to ask. Yeah, so I'm Shane. I really like movies, and especially Chinese American cinema. I feel like recently there's been a sort of rise with movies like Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell and stuff like that. And so I wanted to ask you, Emily, about, I guess, representation with your film, and kind of if you thought about that while making the movie. And I know that this is sort of a personal story that, based off of your life. And so obviously you want to represent certain things in your life, but did you ever like feel like a pressure or maybe a responsibility to represent a larger audience of Chinese Americans?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And there's just like so many layers to it. So, these two films were largely self-financed, or they came from, investors that I found. So I was basically the studio in this case. I found the financing. So I feel like I have control of the story and I want to tell Asian American stories. Yeah, they were based on my own life, but like, Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong, like could have just been two white people walking around Hong Kong. and that was always the rule that I came up with. If it was something that like, that I found the financing and I put together, I wanted to be an Asian American story. You know, I'm going to run out of stories to tell of myself very soon. I'm not that interesting. Eventually I'm going to tell other stories, but even if that movie doesn't necessarily have to be Asian American, I would still love to make one of the leads or whatever, or major theme Asian American, if that's something that, if it's a project that I put together. Because I feel like there are enough people out there telling stories of other races, you know, but this is something I could do for my community. But that said, you know, I am about to direct a film that has no Asians in it. You know, it's sort of like, it's like a high school YA rom-com, you know, it's like no Asian American themes. I'm trying to see if we could cast more Asian American actors in some of the supporting roles. But yeah, like I could direct a movie that's not about Asian Americans or feature Asian Americans. I could tell those stories. But if it's something that I generate, you know, of course I want to help with representation for my community. So the second part of your story, then it's a great responsibility of, well, how do you represent? And that is a disclaimer that I feel like I have to make more often, because I think when you as a community don't get that many stories told about you, you feel like every movie that comes out about Chinese Americans or whatever has to represent all of Asian America. And one, that's a lot of pressure, and that's just not reality. You know, like people who say, well, I'm not a crazy rich Asian, I can't relate to that movie. You know, there's no, that is a very specific type of movie, and that's not meant to represent all Asians. But there was like so much writing on that movie of like, well, that movie doesn't represent me, it's bad representation. And how many white rom-coms have there ever been made? You don't compare, you know, like Pretty Woman to, you know, Saving Private Ryan, you know what I'm saying? But because we have so few movies, they're like, oh yeah, like why are all Asian movies just these silly rom-coms? And it's like, you give so much pressure to each movie. And I certainly feel it, because every time I make a movie, I get tons of hate mail from Asians who just find so many things to complain about. Like, my dad's not like that. I'm like, well, but my dad is. Like, I'm not trying to make a movie about your dad. Or, you know, why is she with a white guy? There's just people will complain about everything. And the thing is, then you are doing a disservice, because when Asian American artists are out there, they're telling their stories, even if it's not your story, let them tell their story so that someday they could open a door perhaps for you to tell your story. And I don't expect your story to be the same as mine, and vice versa. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate all your thoughts, and the movie as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackson.
Hi, Emily. It's very nice to meet you. I was a big fan of your movie. I'm a senior here at UVU in pursuing the directing track. And so I found Sasha in your movie to be a very interesting character, especially now that you've kind of remarked that between Sasha and her sister, they're sort of your own experiences split into two different characters and stuff. So my question for you is, using when you're directing a character that's sort of based off of your own, off of yourself, what was the kind of direction that you gave for specifically? I was interested in when at the end of the first act, when she first lands back in China, back in the small city in China, what direction did you give her there? Because I was trying to like read her, and I was like, oh, what is she thinking here and stuff? So could you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, like the number one thing I told the actors was, don't think you are doing a copy of me. Because, you know, Anna was like, oh, I'm like studying her on set, I feel so much pressure, I'm supposed to capture the director. I'm like, no, this is not an imitation, this is not anything. Like, you need to make Sasha your own. And in fact, like, I casted Anna because I thought, not so much like that Anna reminded me of myself at 24, but I thought Anna really reminded me of this Sasha character, just like sort of exaggerated version of the Sasha character. Like she embodies so much of it that like sort of, you know, because like with Sasha, she could very easily be very unlikable, and she's supposed to be pretty unlikable in the beginning, but because like Anna is just such an exuberant like performer, you kind of end up liking her despite her being such a brat and so spoiled. So and Lin Chen too, I was like, she's like, oh, so I'm like you now. I'm like, throw all of that away. Don't think of this as an imitation. You're not copying me. This is not a biopic in any way. It's like, these are your characters, and you have to make them your own. And I do think like with the Sasha character, because we want to see her arc. So, and I think like the first act was maybe a little bit more, we exaggerated it a little bit more for comedic effects and also to show her eventual arc, right? So she has to be like the brat, and she has to really hate China, and honestly, you know, like Anna did not love China. And I think a lot of it came from her own just experience. You know, like we were not in sort of like, you know, the Shanghai and the Beijing. We were in a very small town, and she's vegan. So there were just a lot of things that she drew from just not knowing what to eat in China, like she just like was not really enjoying herself. And I think a lot of like Sasha's sort of displeasure with China came from Anna's own kind of just her reaction to being stuck in this like small town in China. And we didn't have social media, you know, like we were just like very locked in, and we were there for like 3 weeks. So a lot of that actually came very naturally to her.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Another quick question. I noticed that a lot of this film is shot handheld, a lot of it. I just wanted to know what was your reasoning for that?
Yes, so that's interesting you mentioned that, because I do think maybe in hindsight, I wouldn't have done that. And the reason I did that is because this is meant for a film festival movie. That was the end goal. It's like, I want to get into Sundance, I want to get into South by. And that is not the reason, and I will admit this was a mistake I made. That is not the reason for you to design the look of your film. So I've sat on the jury of many independent film festivals. Like I was a juror on like LA Film Festival before it folded, Napa Valley Film Festival. And I just remember like every time I sit on these juries, like every single film in like the narrative competition or whatever, it's that handheld, shallow depth of field. You know, it's got a very distinct look where you just know this is an artsy indie film. In a way where whenever I watch something too polished, I almost feel like, oh, this doesn't look like a film festival movie. You know, it has a different look. And in hindsight, I mean, like I stand by like the look of the film, but I feel like this plays a little bit broader than your typical art house independent film, even though they made it into South by, but South by is a very populist type of festival. It does a lot of comedies and horror films. You know, it's not like Sundance where it's like very artsy, and it's a different type of festival setting. And I think I did it to announce that this is a serious film festival movie, even though I think a more polished look might have fit the tone of the movie better. But it was just something that we've already started shooting. And that was something I realized when I was watching the dailies. But by that point, it's not like I could reshoot the first week. It's just weird. It's like, oh, you go from handheld and all of a sudden you're like on sticks and dollies. So yeah, that is sort of like one directorial choice that I kind of wish I would have reconsidered. But you know, the movie's done and it did well, like really well on the festival circuit. It went to a lot of film festivals, and I don't think it being handheld hurt it in any way. But I don't think my intentions were the correct ones, and that's not how you should look at the story and see what visually works the best. And I think most indie filmmakers sort of just default to that. We're going to do handheld and we're going to, you know, because it's what an indie film looks like.
Yeah,
See,
for
I'm
sure.
still learning. I'm always making mistakes.
Sure. I'm not saying the handheld thing was a bad thing at all.
No.
I'm very curious about it. Okay, that's everything I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackson. Kirsten Sorensen.
Oh gosh, okay. So I had a lot of questions, but I think the one I want to ask is because when I was looking up the movie, I saw Anna and I'm like, I've seen her somewhere, and I didn't realize that she's like a huge YouTuber. So I wanted to know how you came across her. And before you answer, she is very charismatic, so I can see why you put her in the role, because like you said, I couldn't even hate her at the beginning, even though she was kind of a brat. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's a good question, because I love talking about casting. So Anna was someone that, so when I read the script, I didn't really have anyone in mind, because I needed someone who's that like 20 something, you know, Asian American girl, and like that has a little bit of a name, and I couldn't think of anyone. So I sort of like did some digging. And at the same time, I was being sent out by my agents to a lot of like general meetings with like digital companies. And at every single one, they're like, oh, do you know Anna Akana? Because she's Asian, I'm Asian. So they're like, you two should know each other. But I didn't know who she was. But because enough people mentioned her, I went home and I like looked her up, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole watching all of her YouTube videos. And I just thought she was so watchable. She's so likable. She's so charismatic. And I'm like, this is it. This is Sasha. Like, she is exactly like, I didn't have Anna in mind when I was writing Sasha, but when I saw Anna's videos, I was like, that's it. That's Sasha. And I think, so this is where, you know, when you do an indie film, maybe Anna would have auditioned. I mean, she's not like a huge star, but she has enough of a following where, you know, this is like a tiny indie film. My casting director basically was like, if you are passionate enough about this actress, make an offer, because it always feels nice when someone offers you a role versus making you audition, and they may overlook the fact that you're only offering them very like SAG scale, basically, right? So that's what we did. I took a leap of faith and I just made an offer, and she read the script and loved it. And I think we met for the first time on Skype because, I think I was in Hong Kong at the time when she read the script, and I was like, I'm location scouting. And we had a conversation, and we really hit it off, and she came on board. I didn't look at any other actresses, no other offers. Well, usually when you send an offer, it's only, one at a time. So yeah, she was a very easy get. And it doesn't always happen this way. Sometimes you could send out offers to like 10 actors and they all pass. I think obviously if I were sending offers to like, I don't know, Brad Pitt or, like, I'm sure he's much harder to get, but I think someone like Anna, who has never been the lead of a film, I think that was attracted to her and she loved the story. So despite the fact that she could make much more money just posting a YouTube video than what she made on this movie, it gave her a nice, lead role that she could sink her teeth into. So that's honestly really good advice when you guys start casting for your own films. Don't be afraid to reach for the stars. The worst that could happen is they will say no, because a lot of them have a lot of money. If sometimes you offer them something they haven't done before, they might just do it for SAG scale. You never know.
All right, thank you. That was awesome. Yeah, and also love the movie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, a couple more questions here. One from Valerie Lee.
Hi, I'm Valerie Lee. I'm a senior and focusing on cinematography. I really enjoyed your movie.
Thank you.
Like, I'm also Chinese, and so there was a couple of things here and there that I actually thought were funny because like I related to them, like the way that Sasha like can understand Chinese but really struggles to speak. I definitely deal with that. And I kind of thought it was funny like when you brought up the WeChat, because like my mom is obsessed with it.
Yes.
But yeah, I really loved watching this because I just don't get to watch a lot of Chinese American films.
Mm-hmm.
Since this is since this is based off your life, and the storyline of your dad is kind of like a hard one. How did that go when you were talking to him about how you're going to portray him? Like, did he think you portrayed him unfairly? Like, did you have to adjust it based off what he said? I'm just curious about that.
Well, luckily he didn't have script approval. So it's weird. Like, he knew I was making a movie because obviously we went to his house and we shot in his house, and he kind of peripherally like kind of got what the movie was about, that there's this character that was sort of inspired by him. But he never read the script or anything like that. If he asked to read it, I would have sent it to him. But like, my dad does not have the patience to sit and read a 100-page script. So we finished the movie, we shot the movie. I got into film festivals, and people keep asking, so what did your dad think of it? What did your dad think of it? And like, for a long time, he just like, he hadn't seen it because it hasn't made its way to Hong Kong. So finally, I think this was like 5 months into our festival run, you know, after we went to all these cities, we got into a film festival in Hong Kong. And so, you know, like everyone in Hong Kong, my dad included, everyone who worked on the movie, like went to see it. And I still remember this very distinctly because it was like 4:30 a.m. here in LA. That was when the movie was getting out in Hong Kong. And I was just like waiting, like to see everyone's reaction. And then like when the movie let out, I got a flurry of messages from friends and family and like, we loved it. That was so great, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what did that, like, I kept waiting for a text from my dad. And finally, I think at like an hour later, like 5:30 a.m. and he was like, good job, daughter. That was really good. Like, it was like a short, very short text, but then it was followed by like 5 thumbs up emojis. And I was like, whew. So there might've been things, we never had a conversation where like, oh, why did you portray me this way? Why did you portray me that way? He probably thought it. I mean, he took a while to get back to me, but I think in the end, he decided whatever issues he had with the movie, it's like, he was proud of the fact that I made this movie and got it out. And, you know, I'm sure there were tons of things he didn't like about his portrayal, but he bottled it up and it was just like, we'll just leave it at that. And I'm proud of you. You did a good job. 5 thumbs up emojis. And that was that.
Thanks for answering that. Yeah, sorry, that was a little bit personal.
No, and it's a good question. People always ask me that, what did your dad think of it? It's like, I don't know. If he hated it, he didn't let me know about it.
Well, it's nice to hear that he told you he was proud. At least there's that. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Valerie. Also, so Roan, who asked a question before, Emily, how are you holding up? You all right?
Mm-hmm.
One more? And I kind of have one more too after that, if you don't mind. But Ron came up with a second question and said if there's time, you'd like to ask it. Ron, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, my second question actually got kind of answered, which was what inspired the casting for Anna Akana. But I actually kind of follow that up. What inspired the casting for Dad, for Teddy?
Yeah, so that's quite a story. So the daughters were like so easy. I talked about Anna. We sent an offer. She read it, loved it. Lynn Chen is someone that Duane has worked with. She's lovely. So I wanted Lynn. I knew I wanted Lynn for the older sister. And I went through our mutual friend, Dave Boyle. I sent the script. I didn't even go through her agent. I sent it to our friend, Dave, and he emailed it to her. I think it was like on a Thursday. And then by that Monday, she's like, I'm in. So the daughters were so easy, but the father was so hard. Because I wanted an Asian actor, like not necessarily an Asian American actor. I wanted a named actor in Asia. So someone who's authentically Asian, not someone who's Asian American, and someone with a little bit of a name value. And we went out to a lot of people. And I just feel like the name actors there just would never do a small film like this. They just don't understand, they don't need to do indie films, and indie film is just not a concept they really understand. So, we just got a lot of rejections, or sometimes the worst is when they string you along. They're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah is really intrigued by this concept, but he needs more time to read. And then 2 months would pass by, 3 months would pass by. And then you're like, is he going to read it or is he not going to read it? So Causing the Father honestly delayed this movie several times. Like we were going to shoot, but I'm like, we don't have a father yet. So how I came about Richard, who ends up playing the father, was he had a small cameo in my first movie, Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong. And Richard is actually a veteran Hong Kong actor, been in, I think, over 200 movies in Hong Kong, was nominated for like the Hong Kong Oscars like twice. And he was in my first movie. The only reason he did a cameo in that movie was because his daughter knows my producer. So it was sort of like a personal connection. The reason I didn't go out to him originally was because like Richard is 80. Richard is old. He's not the right age for Teddy. Like he's 10 years too old. So we never thought of him because we're like, well, he's like a decade too old. We were going out to actors sort of like in their late 60s. But then after we kept getting rejected, we're like, hey, what if we like age down Richard? Like in real life, he's got like white hair, like a full beard, white beard. Like he just looks old. And then we're like, yeah, maybe we could like give him a haircut, like trim his, like cut his beard and just like, could we age him down? And we're like, I think we did a Photoshop. We're like, yeah, I think we could see it. So then we went to him and I wrote him and I said, I wrote the script sort of loosely inspired by my father and you perfect for the father role. And I think he took like 2 weeks to read it. And then he came back and said he like wanted to help me. And that was amazing. So he like essentially saved the movie because we didn't have a father for such a long time. And he said he was willing to get a haircut and do all that stuff. So we aged him down and it really worked out great. And we already had sort of like a working relationship, although this one is completely different. On the last film, he came out for like 2 hours, shot his scene as a fortune teller. But this one, like we really put him through the ringer. He's at that point where he doesn't even really work that much anymore because he doesn't have to. He had a luxurious career. He doesn't really need to work. And he definitely doesn't need to work on a low budget indie film where he's not getting paid a lot, doesn't have a trailer, doesn't have any of the comfort that he's used to, but he did it because he wanted to help me tell this story about my family. So, I'm very grateful to him for coming on board. So yeah, I had 3 out of the 3 leads. They all have very different backgrounds. Like Anna is new media, YouTube, hasn't done a lot of movies. Lynn is like indie film queen. She's in like every Asian American indie film. And then Richard, who's this like veteran actor. So they all kind of like come from different acting backgrounds and they all have to sort of mesh and be believable as a family. Yeah.
Thank you. That I never would have guessed that Richard was 80. You guys did a great job.
We did a good job aging him down. Yes.
I loved him, and I think him, Anna, and Lynn all gave super heartfelt performances. I really felt it. So great job casting.
Thank you.
Okay, last question for you. It's a little personal, but if you wouldn't mind talking, because I know this is new, fairly new anyways, talk about filmmaking and motherhood.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I last year I had my twins. So they're almost, oh my God, no, we're in 2021. Sorry, 2019. I still think we're in 2020. Oh my God, 2019. So they're almost 2 now. And in 2019, I had just finished. So Go Back to China was making its festival rounds and I actually missed. So I didn't go to South by Southwest. Oh. My film premiered there, but I didn't go because I was 9 months pregnant. And 2 weeks later, I had my twins. So that was sort of like the first taste of, wow, like your life changed. It's like a lifelong dream to get into a film festival like South by, and then to not be able to go, but then it's for a very good reason. Because I mean, I remember like the night before my premiere, my cast, my crew, they're partying it up in Austin. I was having like major FOMO. I was so sad. And I remember crying like, oh my God, this is like the coolest thing to happen to me. And then I can't go. But you know what? 2 weeks later, like the coolest thing ever happened. I had my kids. And then, yeah, like you just learn to really pull back. So 2019 was all about, promoting Go Back to China festival circuit for RH Tomorrow in Hong Kong. I went to every festival. It's like the best part of filmmaking. It was like you went through all that blood, sweat, and tear, and now you get to party it up and share it with an audience. It's great. With Go Back to China, I really sort of pared down, like I had to be very choosy on the ones that I went to, thank God for Lynn. Like Lynn ended up going to most of them for me, and she had a great time. So yeah, it's just like pulling that back. Now 2020, like it was just sort of everyone sort of got grounded in 2020. I didn't really have anything immediate, but like prior to that, I was just going out there pitching on films, and then everything sort of shut down and there was like nothing to even pitch on. I wasn't even getting scripts, and I literally was just like home 24/7 with the kids. And now I'm about to leave to direct my first studio film, and I will have to go on location for 4 months and leave them completely because of COVID. I don't feel comfortable taking them on set with me and exposing them to God knows what that I could get from set. So it's going to be very hard. Like I think that's going to be the hardest part of going through this journey, which is, I'm so excited I get to direct my first big, I mean, it's not a huge budget, but it's like a studio level film. But then the trade-off is I won't be able to see my kids for 4 months, and they're so little, they're only 2. So that's going to be very hard. And that's going to be, I'm definitely not looking forward to that part, but I think it's part of the course. If you want to be a working mom, filmmaker, a lot of times you have to go on location and you may have to leave your family behind. It is what it is. Like, I'll tell you how it is afterwards, how I survive it. Right now, it's something that I'm sort of dreading.
Well, thanks for sharing. I think that's always important to talk about with students. They know kind of what's coming down the pike.
Yes.
It has been a lovely evening.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. To all of you out there who haven't yet sat and watched It's Already Tomorrow in Hong Kong, definitely do it. It's
free on a lot of platforms. It's free on like Amazon Prime, Hulu, like a lot of YouTube, I think too.
Yeah. So it's a great example for those of you who are in my digital cinema production 3 class. Another good example of a microfilm. Although we discussed, kind of micro, but because of Hong Kong, kind of not. But the script certainly is a micro budget script. Thanks so much for spending this time. We just really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Everyone, unmute yourself and give her a big thank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate it. We'll see you, Emily.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. Thank you.
And Emily, we're going to let you go. People around here, I'd like you to stick around for just a couple announcements.
Okay, so I'll go. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
you.
Just again, a couple announcements.